Okay, so welcome again, everyone. As I mentioned a minute ago to folks in the room, my name is Tony Berkman from CBI. I'm facilitating today. I've taken over this project from my colleague Lana Ferguson, who I know was a facilitator for this group for a long time and really made some great connections with many of you. So I'm very happy to be taking over from Ona. I've heard really wonderful things about this group, the important work that's happening here, really spearheading what PFAS remediation can be. So one of the first projects of its kind. So I'm real privileged to be here. Thanks so much for for having me. And I'll give my colleague Artie a chance to introduce herself as well.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to meet you all. I'm Arti Halde and also with the Consensus Building Institute. And like Toby said, it's been really great to talk to Ona, learn a little bit about the work you're all doing, and happy to be here and working with you all.
So just a few words, sort of logistically speaking, if you have not signed in, especially if you're a RAB member, right, please make sure that you sign in on the sign-in sheet at some point before leaving today. We want to have a record of who is here. In terms of how the conversation is going to work in the room, I understand there's a norm of when you want to speak, just putting your placard like this. So if you're in the room and you're a member, I know that you're interested in speaking. We'll have discussion later on, not in the moment. If you are a member on Zoom, you can raise your hand. And RT will let me know, raise your virtual Zoom hand, and RT will let me know that you've done that. I won't have visibility into the Zoom the whole meeting, but she will. If you are a member of the public, we will be having public comment at 7:45. And so everyone is welcome to share. If you are in the room, we'll just ask for a show of hands. If you're interested in making a public comment, there are also public comment cards on the table over there. So you're welcome to submit a written comment through that card, or just if you don't want to raise your hand for whatever reason, but you want to just make it known you want to comment, you can just indicate that on your comment card and give it to RT. If you are online, we'll say a little more about this, but you will make your public comment or let it be known that you want to make your public comment by emailing RT. Okay, so RT, you can put your email address in the chat. So those of you who are online members of the public, you can see that. Just email RT that you want to make a public comment, and when the time comes, we will give you an opportunity to speak. If you're not a PEAS RAB member and you're joining online, you normally can't be heard, right? There's sort of a different statuses for people, but when public comment comes time, if you want to speak, we'll promote you and give the opportunity for you to do that. I think that is all the issues that I need to mention about just the Zoom and in the room. I will say, I think that all the tech is working and audio should be fine for everyone. Fingers crossed when we get some online comments that that'll actually be the case. So with that, let me go ahead and share our agenda for today. Have a little more sense of what to expect. So we have seen the technical presentations. We're going to do a round of introductions in a minute. We'll then have a presentation from USGS on PFAS and background on PFAS in New Hampshire. So a presentation on some background data on soils in New Hampshire. We'll have some additional live presentations from the Air Force, WSP, and ECC. An update on drinking water from the city of Portsmouth, and then we'll transition into open RAB discussion time. I know we have a presentation from Andrea. It's going to be happening in there, and we'll have a chance for any member who wants to speak for comments and questions. I will add, we're going to do, for the USGS presentation, a little Q&A immediately after that, because our USGS presenter may need to leave before the end of our meeting, and we want to give an opportunity to do that. At 7:45, we will have public comments, as I mentioned, and then wrap things up and be done by 8 o'clock. Okay, so with that, let's do introductions in a second. Before we do that, though, we just want to acknowledge that Russ McCann was a PEAS member and did his service for, I believe, 2 years. If it was longer than that, I apologize, but I think we just he has moved on, at the end of his 2-year term, but I think we just want to acknowledge and thank Russ, for his service, much appreciated. We also have, some new members to introduce. I'll ask, our new members to, in a minute, just give your name, just a little bit of a brief background about who you are and what brought you to the RAB and what you hope to bring to our group. So, but if it's okay, maybe we can start off with Mary. Are you here today?
I am.
So Mary, introduce yourself.
I'm Mary Marshall. I'm retired engineer and have worked in the Seacoast area for over 30 years. I also served for almost 30 years on the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard RAB, which is now completed because we have cleaned up the shipyard. So I have a very good feeling about that. And if anybody has any questions for me, I'm happy to answer.
Great, thanks so much, Mary. Welcome. Great to have you. So we have Brad here.
Right here.
Great, please go ahead, Brad.
Brad Connolly, retired military and high school science teacher. And I was a firefighter in the Air Force moons ago. And I've been following Andrea's process throughout, and I really want to become involved. Appreciate it.
Great, thanks so much, Brad. Great to have you in the group. And then we're also pleased to share that we now have a permanent RAB member from the town of Newington, or there is a permanent position on the RAB for the town of Newington, and the appointee in that position is Bob Flanagan. So is Bob here? Want to introduce yourself?
No one told me this was permanent. I'm Bob Flanagan. I'm a selectman here in Newington. I live in Newington. Recently retired from the Air Force after 39 years. So I've traveled around quite extensively, but I've always maintained my home here in Newington. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Bob. Great to have you. And you didn't realize this would be a lifetime appointment, so I hope you were there. All right, so let's go around the room and do the introductions. And I think Dr. Tokanov we'll let you introduce yourself because you're here. I know he's presenting in a minute, but we'll also go around and I think give the members a chance to say who you are. If you want to, your affiliation and any brief word of welcome. Great. So go ahead.
Sure. Hi, Andrea Tacana from the U.S. Geological Survey. I've been working on PFAS for about 10 years now. Mostly working on state and transport, but also a lot of analytical work. I run a lab at the USGS working on PFAS targeted and non-targeted analysis. Really excited to be here. I've heard a lot about this community and what people have been struggling with for a very long time now. So I'm very honored to be here and meet all of you. And I've met Andrea a long time ago and heard all about her work. We were discussing probably 5 or 6 years ago now. So happy to be here, and I will be around for the rest of the meeting. So
okay.
I don't know if that's fits your schedule, but
Great.
yeah.
Paul Roy, I'm from Newington and I'm a community member.
Yeah, Mark Mattson. I'm in my 3rd or 4th term here as a RAB member, retired aquatic ecologist, 39 years. My primary background and interest is in ecological risk assessment.
Chris Kinney, I'm the Air Force Program Manager for Peace, kind of running all aspects of the programs.
Rod, I work with the International Database.
Mike Daly, US EPA from our Boston office.
Peter Sandin, Hampshire PES Project Manager for P.
Heidi Grandy, community RAB member from here in Newington.
Rosa Lopresto, a community member. I'm also a water commissioner for the town of Rye. And we have water that is contaminated with PFAS. And I'm also on the SB 85 committee and the Copley Landfill subcommittee. My background is a retired doctor.
I'm Al Patton, Water Resource Manager for the City of Portsmouth, and I've been involved with PFAS since I started working for the city 9 years ago.
Gary Sheehan, I'm the RAB member for the Peace Development Authority.
Lindsay Papa, I'm an environmental scientist with WSP.
Haven Plant, I'm a project hydrogeologist with WSP or consultant.
I'm Mike Donahue, and I'm a Newington community member and a retired lawyer who first learned about Superfund a long time ago. I'm still learning. Welcome to the new people. Are really happy to have you on board. I'd say to Mary in particular, you're lucky you didn't have a firefighting school over there at the shipyard, or you'd still be meeting.
Hi, my name is Andrea Amico. I am co-chair of the RAB. I'm a Portsmouth resident and I have been involved with PFAS issues since 2014 when I first learned about the contamination here. I had 2 children attending daycare at Pease and my husband was working for a company at Pease at the time. So it's a very personal issue for me.
Hi, I'm Peggy Lamson. I'm a member of RAB. I'm also a member of the Pease Development Authority, which has been a very interesting experience, and working with our town selectmen, our planning board, etc. And it's been a pleasure to represent Newington at RAB and also on the authority. Thank you.
Ben Johnson, community member from Newington.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone. We have one just quick order of business to approve the summary from the November meeting. This was sent out on March 21st. We added edits. If anyone had them, we did not receive any edits. So just wanted to check with the group, is it okay to consider this meeting summary approved by the group? Okay, great. So having heard no objections, we'll consider that summary approved and get it posted. Okay, so let's move on to our first live presentation of the day. So Dr. Kokernam, thanks so much for your introduction of yourself a second ago. I will run your slides, okay, and get those up and hand the floor over to you.
I'm gonna stand over here or?
Yeah, why don't you come up front? I think maybe it's easier for people.
Yeah,
that way.
and just a reminder, this is a USGS presentation. We're so happy to have you, Dr. Turkanoff. But again, this is not a presentation from the Air Force. Just keep that in mind. And please ask your questions. And again, so that the rest of the meeting afterwards can then focus on Air Force business as we move forward. So again, thanks.
Yes,
Yeah,
sure. Sorry. Is that better? Okay.
So you want to advance the slide?
I can, unless you want, if you want to.
Yeah, maybe I'll.
You know what?
Or can I flip it over here?
Yeah. It's actually on this laptop.
Okay.
Yeah, so I will move it over here for you and I will speed it.
All right. Okay, well, I'll just take it. Everybody can hear me okay? All right. So again, my name is Andrea Tukranov. I'm a research hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey and very happy to be here tonight. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about our study looking at what we're calling background concentrations in soil across the state of New Hampshire. Really what we mean by background is anthropogenic background, because true background would be 0. But that's just not really realistic anymore for PFAS. You probably have seen articles about PFAS in the atmosphere, PFAS in the rainfall. So it's in the soil, and I'm going to just, for the sake of simpler speaking, call it background, but really what I mean is anthropogenic background of PFAS. I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about an upcoming study and a little bit of work we've already done that's published, looking at PFAS in groundwater supplies as well, just sticking with the theme of looking at sort of background ambient concentrations of PFAS. Okay, so this work was a partnership between New Hampshire DES and the USGS. The USGS did most of the field and the analytical stuff, and we constantly were talking with DES for input on what they needed for their work as well. It was a really nice collaboration with many, many people. One of the reasons that we did this work is to help them with their soil remediation standard rulemaking. That was initiated in November of 2023 for 4 compounds, the compounds that New Hampshire regulates. And they consider a number of things when they do these regulations, and one of them you can see is background soil concentrations, and for that, they need to understand what the background in the state truly was. The second point there is leaching-based soil concentrations, and that we had a whole other portion of the study that I don't have time to talk with you about today, but if you're curious, I'm happy to go over that with you, where I spent many weeks in the lab running batch and column experiments, trying to understand if you add PFAS to a soil and water mixture, how does it distribute between the soil and the water components? And that tells us a little bit about what it would do in the environment and whether or not groundwater is at risk. So that's sort of the background of why we started the study with the state. New Hampshire came to us and asked us for assistance with it. And so we kind of developed this to essentially from scratch to try and understand background across the state. So we limited our sampling to lands that were only classified as forested, shrubland, herbaceous, barren, or wetland. And the purpose of that is we don't want to look at urban or developed lands or agricultural lands. We specifically wanted lands that are quote unquote undisturbed as far as we can tell. We did place a 500-meter buffer around all parcels that had any known or potential PFAS contamination to try and stay outside of that area of influence. And those are all of those circles that you see on the map are all of the known PFAS sources across the state of New Hampshire. And as you can see, they are quite numerous. And Keys is one of them, of course, but there are many. And we were pretty lucky because the state of New Hampshire is quite forward in their, assessment of PFAS compared to many states. And so they had a really good handle on what PFAS sources there were across the state, which allowed us to really use that and exclude it from our study. So we gridded the state into 100 equal area grid cells. And so any of the colored area that you see in that map is land that is acceptable for sampling, that's natural land use. And every single box is an equal area. And so we took one sample from every single box with the idea that that minimizes bias that we have. And it also provides equal statewide coverage. Also was not very convenient because we really needed to figure out who the landowners were in all these randomly selected locations. And that's not as easy as it sounds, and get permission as well, which is also not as easy as it sounds. So it took us quite a bit of time, but it did provide a better data set. So at all 100 of those locations, we sampled 0 to 6 inches in depth. We were really interested in that top surface soil concentration. And then at half of the locations, we went down to 6 inches in 6 to 12 inches in depth. And then at 6 locations, we went all the way down to 36 inches where we could, to just better understand migration of PFAS through the soil profile. And we analyzed for a whole lot of things, PFAS, of course, but then also the total oxidizable precursor assay. That is essentially an assay that breaks down precursors that we may not know and we probably are not analyzing for into products that we can actually analyze for which we actually have standards and can quantify. And so we're able to get some understanding of what other PFAS are out there that we cannot measure right now. You've all heard that there are thousands of different PFAS compounds. We have analytical standards for about 50, 60 of them. It's not possible to quantify them all right now. So this TOPA assay helps us get a better look at what else might be out there. We also looked at pH, total organic carbon, protein, which has also been associated with PFAS absorption, moisture, and did a visual classification of the soils. Okay, so I'm going to show a number of plots like this. Essentially, they're all oriented the same way where it goes from short chain length to long chain length. So the short chain length PFAS are those that are really mobile in the environment. They move pretty quickly with water. The long chain lengths are the stickier ones. They really stick to soils. They don't like to move so much in water. So we're looking here from short chain to long chain on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis is detection frequency. So how often did we actually see those compounds across our 100 samples in the state. And so we're looking in orange are the carboxylates, those with the COO head group, so things like PFOA. And then in blue are the sulfonates, things like PFOS that have a sulfonate head group. And so we see pretty high detection frequencies. It's 100% for several of the compounds. We did see PFAS in every single soil sample that we sampled across the state, all the way down to 12 inches. Every single one of them had PFAS detections. And if we look at the compounds, it's predominantly the carboxylate compounds. When we look at the blue lines, the sulfonates, we see the zigzag pattern, which we see high detection frequencies for the even chain lengths, so 4, 6, 8. And then for the odd chain lengths, the 5 and the 7, we don't see very high detection frequencies at all. And that's reflective of manufacturing history. The table there that you see are not plotted. Those are other compounds, mostly precursors, and that we do have standards for, and replacement compounds. And generally, we saw pretty low detection frequencies for most of those. Okay, so if we look at concentrations now instead of detection frequency, we're looking again on the x-axis from short chain to long chain for the carboxylates. Those are in purple. And then hopefully you can see the colors. And then from short chain to long chain in blue are the sulfonates. And then that green one is HFPODA, or GenX is commonly what it's known as. On the y-axis is a log plot of concentration. And so those are pretty different concentrations, just calling attention to the fact that it's a log plot. PFAS, to nobody's surprise, is highest in concentration. The median concentration of PFAS was 0.96 nanograms per gram. That's ppb across the state of New Hampshire. The median concentration of PFOA was 0.76 as a close second. You can see that for most of the carboxylates, we had fairly high detection frequencies and high concentrations. And then as we look at the sulfonates, it's really dominated by PFOS. And I can come back to that. I know there's a lot on that slide. Okay, let's look a little spatially at how this looks. So I'm showing here the sum of 35 different PFAS compounds in 2 different ways. The first is the sum in nanograms per gram. That's how I think about PFAS, and most people do. The second plot is showing in picomoles per gram, because technically if you're going to sum up concentrations from different molecular weights, it should be in molar form. But nobody thinks in moles, so I'm going to show the rest of the presentation in nanograms per gram. But it doesn't really change the story very much. So you see that there doesn't seem to be an obvious pattern when you're just looking at this and looking at those concentrations across the states. But, across the state. But if we start dividing it into bins, we can see patterns start to emerge. So all of 3 of these plots are on the same scale. Up to 3 greater than, the deep red is greater than 3 nanograms per gram. I don't know if you can read that back there. So the first plot shows PFOA, the second one PFAS, and the third one, the top result, those precursor results. For PFOA, we do see a weighting in the southern part of the state, and that is statistically significant, where we have higher concentrations of PFOA in the southern portion of the state than in the northern portion. For PFAS, we don't see that same trend as strongly. We see very high concentrations of PFAS even in very remote places up in northern New Hampshire. Exactly why this is, I think, is still up in the air, but we do know that PFAS is strongly retained by organic carbon and by protein, and we see those correlations in the data as well, so it could reflect the soil composition that we're looking at. For TAFA, we don't see very much evidence of precursors. I will say that TAFA has a lot of qualifiers to it. We know that we're not capturing all precursors or all PFAS out there, but it doesn't indicate that there is a large fraction of oxidizable precursors in the soil, which is really good news. It means that our targeted methods are doing a pretty good job. So how does New Hampshire compare to nearby states? Both Maine and Vermont have had some soil sampling done as well. And so we plotted this up where we could. So we're looking again at the same orientation on the x-axis with all the compounds. And then the red boxes are the New Hampshire study, that's our study that we're showing here. And the open boxes in yellow are the 6 to 12 inch, those are the slightly deeper samples. And then in green are the Vermont data, and in purple are the Maine data. And so we can see that New Hampshire has substantially higher concentrations for most compounds, pretty much across the board, unless you are looking at some of these sulfonates, which are pretty low in all states. Why that is, I think, is a good question and requires some follow-up work. Things that we do know: higher population density in New Hampshire, greater industry in New Hampshire. It might have something to do with it. So I didn't mention this before, but for the depth profiles, we see that there is a statistically higher concentration in the 0 to 6 inch sample compared to the 6 to 12 inch sample in almost all cases. And so it indicates that PFAS are really strongly retained in that top soil layer, which is not too surprising because it's also where the organic carbon is, which really likes to stick, PFAS likes to stick to that. We can see that in these soil profiles here, going down to 36 inches in depth. Okay, so I'm going to walk through a little calculation just to put this like kind of in context, and there are a lot of assumptions, so but bear with me here. So if we look at the mass of PFAS in the 0 to 6 inch soil layer across New Hampshire, that's about 3,400 kilograms of PFAS. That assumes that we have median concentrations of 0.96 nanograms per gram. That's the median that we found in our study. It assumes a dry bulk density of 1 gram per centimeter cubed, which is very, very low and definitely on the low end, and a New Hampshire land area excluding lakes and so forth. So 3,400 kilograms of PFAS. What does that mean? Seems kind of like a lot of PFAS, I guess, right? So what does that actually mean in terms of putting it into the context for a drinking water advisory? So for example, 4 nanograms per liter is the proposed MCL for EPA. And if you calculate it that way, it's enough PFAS to contaminate over 7,000 years of drinking domestic water use in New Hampshire at that 4 nanogram per liter concentration. And that's assuming almost 80 million gallons per day used in New Hampshire for domestic uses. So it's a lot of PFAS that's sitting in these soils. I'm not going to walk too much through this, but we did see a number of correlations of what could also be sort of influencing PFAS concentrations in the soils. Protein and total organic carbon have been shown previously by many studies to sorb PFAS nicely, and we see that here as well. We see an inverse correlation between pH of the soil and PFAS, and that has been shown previously as well. So our study is nicely supporting kind of lab experiments that have shown these similar things. And I can go in detail on this if anybody's curious. So in summary, we did detect PFAS in all of our samples down to 12 inches, and that soil does represent a reservoir of PFAS across the state of New Hampshire. It does sort of indicate that there are long-term implications of that. What actually happens moving forward, I think, is a great question. We've started a pilot study trying to understand if you have sort of these ambient anthropogenic background concentrations in the soil, do they leach into groundwater at a concentration that is concerning for human health over time? And that's something that we're looking into now. So I don't know how I'm doing on time.
Yeah, I think you're close to finished. Yeah.
I did talk about the groundwater, but I can cut that part out if we need to.
I think
okay, so that's the leaching study. That's the fourth point here to try and understand what's happening to groundwater. The first 3 points I just talked about, this very first study on the top. If you are curious, there's a link there, and I can provide that afterwards as well. The second bullet point talks about our partitioning experiments in the lab, looking at batch and column experiments to understand how PFAS are partitioning. And then the third point is a study we did looking at 2 different field sites to compare to our lab data. It's a biosolid site and an AFFF site, which would be more comparable with keys. Okay, that's a big study that we've undertaken with DES, New Hampshire DES. The USGS also has its own work on PFAS that has been going on now for many years. And so one of those is our studies looking at groundwater, which I thought might be interesting just from this sort of background perspective. I do think it's becoming very apparent that understanding background of PFAS is incredibly important because we've spent a lot of time trying to understand hotspots, as we rightfully should, like places like Keys, where we know that there are very high concentrations of PFAS. But there is also PFAS and, just very pervasive in our lives, in our atmosphere, in our soil, and in our water. And so I think that, we're coming to the realization that, yeah, if you have a PFAS detection, it might not actually indicate that there's a local source. It could also just mean that that water has interacted, for example, with the atmosphere sometime in the last, 80 years. And I think a lot of work is starting to try and understand that better. And that's certainly what we're trying to do at the USGS. So groundwater, we published a study in 2022 looking at groundwater in the Eastern United States. And what we did in that study is we built a model to try and predict PFAS occurrence. We didn't actually do any predictions in that study. We used it to tell us what are the variables that can predict a PFAS occurrence. And can we use those variables to build a national model? That's what we're currently working on, is a national model of PFAS and groundwater. So that 2022 study, we had 254 groundwater samples, and we analyzed them for everything under the sun, including, VOCs and DOCs and pharmaceuticals and PFAS and tritium, which becomes very important. That's a tracer for groundwater age. We looked at geospatial data, landscape sources of PFAS, you name it. We built our model. That's all the stuff we threw into the model. We had 57 different predictor variables. And it did a really good job. And it told us that, well, something that was pretty obvious in retrospect, yeah, tritium is going to be a really good predictor of PFAS. Tritium concentrations increased around 1953 at the start of chemical weapons testing, which is coincidentally around the same time that PFAS started being used and manufactured and distributed in the environment. So tritium is an excellent tracer for PFAS. Unfortunately, we don't have national coverage of tritium across the US. Otherwise, we could have built our model in 2 days and been done. But we don't have that. So we have to rely on things that we have mapped. So things like distances from fire training areas like Peace or other PFAS sources. Urban land use is a great predictor of PFAS occurrence. And so that's what we're currently working on now. And I really hope that those results are going to be published soon and used by members potentially like yourselves in trying to direct resources to where they're needed or predicted to be needed. So that's just something I wanted to share with you. And I think I'm going to just leave it there since I just threw a lot of information at everybody. So that's it.
Thank you so much. I think knowing that you'll be here later, why don't maybe we can press forward with presentations and return to Q&A on this later on, if that's okay. So thank you so much, that was fascinating. So we have some additional presentations from ECC and from Mike Daly at EPA.
You gotta look at this one, eh?
Okay, so I believe this is the right deck for this, yeah, data sharing update, in the right place? Yeah.
Maybe?
Okay.
I don't know what you're looking at.
So here, this is, I think, Chris, you were gonna share a bit.
Yeah, if you have the right deck, it should be my slides in that.
Okay, yes. So let me just check, if you have anything else from Mike, if you want to share anything?
No, I think anything that was gonna add would be editorial to
ECC.
presentation.
Probably mine too.
Relative to the review.
All right. So let me see. Sorry, these were a little bit. Let me get back to Donna. Okay. Okay. Is this? So ECC presentation. I'm sorry. These got in the wrong order somehow. So who's providing the ECC presentation?
It should all be in that same deck, it'll be.
Yeah, I'm just not sure. Okay, in the yeah. Apologies, everyone. Okay. Get this open here.
Well, while that's happening, does anybody have any
Yeah,
questions
yeah,
for the
go ahead.
USGS?
Yeah, it's not such a bad time before.
Okay, why don't we take a question to see that sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah, any questions for Dr. Zafrana?
Andrew?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I really appreciate it. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more. I know you showed how we compared to some other states nearby, but how does our levels compare to other regions of the country?
Well, I think that's difficult to answer because I don't think we have that data.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, I would love to do a national study looking at soil anthropogenic background, but I don't think that there have been a number of studies published looking at sort of globally concentrations of PFAS and it's very opportunistic samples. And so I hesitate to compare our data to that because ours was very specifically designed to focus on background. Other studies have not. So I think that's a hard question to answer right now, but I'd love to work on that.
Okay. Yeah, and just more, I guess, I mean, you did touch upon it a little bit, but in terms of sources, I mean, especially like up north and stuff, you know, I mean, I think we can understand in southern New Hampshire, there's St. Cobain, and in this area, we have Pease, we have Copley landfill, and we know some obvious sources in this area, but I'm just wondering if there's other sources or any thoughts on why it's a widespread issue in the soil throughout the entire state.
My thoughts are that this is very much driven by atmospheric deposition, and I don't think that we have a good handle on atmospheric deposition right now. And I think there's really two questions. There's the local atmospheric depositions, so local sources that might be distributing PFAS within, you know, a certain radius around them. But then there might also be more regional or national or international sources that eventually end up depositing over landscape surfaces, right? And so I don't think we really have a good handle on time series or whether those levels have decreased or increased over time. We just don't have that data. And I'd love to see more atmospheric preset data.
Thank you. I think I saw, Brad, did you have your hand up?
I'll wait, please.
Okay, great. Please go ahead, Rosalie.
That was excellent. Thank you. I just have a few questions. So you said that the long chain, which is PFOA and PFOS, they stick to the soil and they're less mobile. But yet, you know, if you go on the ITRC website and you look at what's happening in the Midwest, in Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, they have studies that show that foam, for example, PFAS in foam, not AFFF foam, they found very high concentration 6 miles from the landfill where the source was. So how do you explain that when you
Sure.
Can you explain that because you have said that they're less mobile, but
less mobile, yeah. So it's
they're
kind of
detected 6 miles. That's pretty mobile, I think.
Well, it depends. Okay, so it depends on a lot of factors. It's a great question because yes, you're right. We would classify those as long chain. They're on the shorter end of the long chain spectrum though. So you're looking at chain length anywhere from really 3, which is PFBA, has 3 fluorinated carbons, all the way up to like 14, 15 fluorinated carbons. So 8 is kind of smack in the middle, right? On the very short end side, you can almost think about them as a conservative tracer. They're going to move basically with groundwater flow. When you start stacking up the chain length, they become slightly less mobile. It doesn't mean that they're not moving. They absolutely are moving. They're just moving slightly slower than groundwater is. And then when you go all the way up the chains, maybe like 14s or 15s, they're almost not moving at that point. At that point, they're really difficult to move. So yeah, you can absolutely get, you know, I did my PhD work on Cape Cod where it's, you know, the Joint Base Cape Cod fire training area, very similar situation as here. And I spent years studying that plume and yeah, we see PFAS miles down gradient. And, but when you look at the groundwater flow rates, they're so high that PFAS is transported, you know, we're looking at 40 or 50 years of transport. So they're still certainly moving long distances away. They're just not moving quite as fast as groundwater is moving.
Okay, and then thank you very much. And then just one other question. So you mentioned how it binds to proteins and total organic carbon, which I didn't know that it doesn't. That was very interesting. And that sits between 0 and 12 inches. Of the testing you did, that you did the soil testing and you down to 12 inches?
Right.
Am I correct?
Yeah.
So in that case, so is it then getting into the groundwater? Because, you know, our aquifers are, that are using for the drinking water, are testing for these legacy PFAS. So it can't be just staying at the surface, it's going into the aquifer, through the bedrock.
You've hit on exactly sort of the next question that we're trying to answer, which is, does it really impact? Because you see these profiles, they decrease with depth, which means that, so, okay, this is all sort of in flux, right? We have incoming atmospheric deposition. We don't know the rates over time back in history, right? We only know what's happening now in the soil. Could have been higher rate previously. Maybe it's less atmospheric deposition now. We really don't know. What we do know is that a lot of soil that top layer has much more organic carbon than deeper layers of soil. And so it likes to retain a bunch of PFAS, but then for sure, you know, some PFAS is probably making its way down. That's that follow-up pilot study where we'd really like to get some additional data to better understand who's actually making it to the shallow groundwater, because of course that's the concern, right? Is it exceeding the New Hampshire AQS standards for groundwater quality? And I think we need to do more work on understanding if that's happening or not. And then, sorry, there was another point of your question.
It's in the aquifers.
Yes, it's in the, so I think that this is kind of a question for long-term strategy, thinking about groundwater supply, because we've seen also from our groundwater studies that modern water post 1953 is a very good predictor of whether or not it has PFAS. And I don't think that's going to change moving forward, which means that the longer we wait, the more the aquifers are recharged and the more percentage of water is recently or has interacted post 1953, right? That number will only ever increase, which means that we're going to have ever increasing PFAS in our groundwater supplies if you follow that line, like that sort of line of reasoning. And I think that has not really been, you know, discussed or thought about in terms of a long-term strategy of how to deal with PFAS, because I see that being an ever increasing problem. And maybe I should throw qualifiers. We haven't done any studies on this, yada, yada. This is my speculation, but if you follow that line of thought, that is what's going to happen, right?
Thank you. Yeah, I see, let's go to Mike.
No, Mark, go.
Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful presentation. I mean, I really appreciate the technical detail and rigor of your study. One picky question and one, I'm a biologist, so when you talk about correlation with protein and with organic compounds close to the surface, is that actually being chemically bound in these organic compounds, or is it being tied up in bacteria bodies?
Oh, I would love to talk with you after.
If that's what it looked like to me.
Because I think that we have this tendency as hydrologists and geologists to completely ignore the fact that anything lives.
Yeah, you toast them. You basically burn them.
You just burn them, right?
You know?
Everything is abiotic in our world, right? And I've seen some very strong evidence in my research that indicates that microbes and bacteria play an extremely strong role in fate and transport. And I'm working with biologists now to try and figure out what that actually is. And I'd love to talk with you after, because I'm not a biologist, but I think it's very important.
Because see, that is the segue into ecological and human health risk.
Right, exactly.
Right, particulate feeders.
Exactly.
All right. A pickier question is, why did you choose a simple random sampling design with one sample per quadrant rather than stratified random, which would allow you replication within the cells, A, and B, maybe some interaction with GIS for mapping of either contours or concentration areas, like you suggested there was a relationship with PFAS, I think, in southern US. with a stratified design, you know, maybe by county or however, you
Yeah.
could have taken another step forward in terms of geographically presenting it.
I 100% agree, and okay, so there are budget limitations is what it comes down to. Like, we had 100 samples and it was, we were thinking about stratifying actually based on land use.
Sure.
So we would look at background versus, we would look at urban versus agricultural. That was a strong consideration, but in the end, we decided we need to understand the background better. There were a number of ways we could have sliced or diced it, and I think it's we could have done stratified random. That would have been a different approach to the study for sure. I think we had to start somewhere, and so we went with full random, and we've actually, it also matches our groundwater sampling design where we do equal area coverage, and it provides statistically correct detection frequencies when you look at the equal area design. So you can actually say across the entire state what the detection frequency was. Stratified random.
Well, you can. You have to send the strata.
Yeah. So,
right?
Yeah.
So, well, however you decide to dice and slice it, basically.
Right. So I think
Yeah.
the point is we had zero information about what was going to be.
Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
so we had to start somewhere. I agree with you. We could go back in now, do a stratified random design and target specific soil compositions, which was a big discussion.
Yeah, or maybe even explore post hoc stratification.
Yes.
Because,
which we have, yeah.
Because in almost every instance, stratified sampling for the same number of samples is more efficient in terms of precision and accuracy. Precision.
Precision, yeah.
Okay. Done.
Okay, all right. I feel like you guys gotta, meet after the session.
Make it outside.
All right, Mike, did you want to ask a question?
No, I was just curious, Doctor, the other side, the neighbors, New Hampshire's neighbors, have they gone through that similar rigor that New Hampshire's gone through? I don't think they have. I think they've had different approaches, and I was just curious, your conclusions may be based on their studies. I don't know. It just seems a lot of rigor gone into the New Hampshire study.
Yeah.
I've known, at least I work with the state of Maine, so I'm familiar with some of the work they've done, but not their totality of work. I wasn't sure if USGS is sort of partnering with the state's, Maine specifically.
We are actually starting to partner with them now on a new, kind of to look at all of they have massive quantities of data that they're trying to make sense of, and we're helping them kind of do that now. Or about to start helping them. So we haven't been working with them on the soils up until now. I think a lot of it was opportunistic sampling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other question I have, and I think get off other topics, but the sort of the intention was to sort of support a bleaching the groundwater number for the New Hampshire's intentions. It seems as though there's a lot of variability, and I was just curious how the standards informing New Hampshire's attempts to try to develop a sort of generic sort of bleaching the groundwater standard, as opposed to something more site specific.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to.
I know it's more of a state question.
Yeah.
But I was just curious what your insights were going to.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to refrain from that just because USGS doesn't get involved in regulatory stuff, so.
Okay, I think so. Bradford, we'll make you the last one here. Go ahead.
So, the tritium, is that like carbon dating with fossils or water? I mean, is there a half-life to the tritium?
Yes, there's a half-life to the tritium, yeah.
You know that off the top of your head? Or?
I'm pretty sure it's fairly short, and I can't pull the number out of my head right now, but I know it's short because I know that we're reaching the edge of what our detection limits are because it's disappearing.
Oh. Thank
you.
Okay. All right, so thanks, folks. Let's press forward to our next presentation. Thank you again, Dr. Pastrana. Fantastic. Deborah, I believe I have the correct slides ready to go here for you. So this should be right. Come on up.
No, this is mine. This isn't yours yet, Deb. But if you want to pull up here, yeah, this is an ongoing topic of discussion. I believe in this McKenna, it was about to hit me up this afternoon for something about it, but data sharing update. Right now, in the last rep, we mentioned that there was a bunch of private wells out there that we had to go reach out to. DES officially made that request of us to go back to those private drinking well owners and ask if we can share their data with the DES, who then obviously, it's in his hands. But since the last rep, we have gone ahead and sent those new agreements, 37 from properties that required an entirely new access agreement. So they were just either old and needed to be redone or had expired. 18 from properties that only needed a letter. Basically, they had a good access agreement and we just needed some permission to share data. And then one from a new property that changed ownership. So anytime a property changes ownership, that owner gets the benefit of the doubt and that you have their own new agreement. And so to date, 15 have been returned and all providing consent, which is fantastic. I was not expecting that. I was hoping it, and now we're seeing if it's coming back, people are willing to participate. So that's just a bunch of good news there for the group. All right, next slide. All right, and then since the last rep, I received a couple of questions, and I just wanted to go through them in this form. I think it behooves the group, benefits the group, and kind of gives us a little update on the overall circle process that kind of feeds into what Deb is going to do from ECC. And Mike, feel free to jump in if you don't like any of the answers or want to add to it. But one of the questions was, the term interim is generally defined as a temporary provisional arrangement, stopgap, and how long would you expect the PFAS cleanup or process to be considered interim? I took this question to mean our treatment systems. I think that's where the person was going. And so I thought this was also a two-part question. And so basically the definition under circle is that interim actions are those taken as needed to specifically reduce an imminent risk to human health or the environment while long-term field investigations are being conducted. And the final remedy is selected. That is a very important part of that definition. Okay, the second part is that that remedy is chosen during the record of decision. Some or all, and we fully expect this at PEAS, our 2 treatment plants are almost certainly going to become a part of that final remedy. Should one of them not be a part of that remedy, it will be terminated in favor of whatever was selected. So that's kind of where we're going with that. So those 2 treatment plants will keep running until that final record of decision is, modifies them, terminates them, or just keeps them going as is. We'll see when we get there. And it's again, the second question was, in the case of this interim, is it a circle? Superfund term? Yeah, it's a circle term. Next slide. All right, another question was, what triggers a move from the interim status and who makes that decision to move the project to the status? Is it the DOD or in concert with regulatory agencies? All right, I'm reading from the slide, but of course, please do so as well. After the RI is done, which we're currently in, we expect it to go until the end of 2026. The feasibility study analyzes alternatives, any and all alternatives, for a final remedial action. The Air Force will then publish a proposed plan, that's a key term, a proposed plan, to solicit public input on its preferred alternative. After that public period comment, we evaluate those inputs and issue a record of decision, which includes the Air Force's responses to significant public comments. Regulatory agencies are involved in each stage of that process, but we as the Air Force will choose the final remedies. Okay. Does an interim designation provide for additional funding? That answer is no. Funding is for interim actions is received as needed to eliminate that imminent risk to human health or the environment until a record of decision is made. So, as is the case with PEAS, everybody would want that once the Haven Wall was found to be impacted, the DOD jumped on it and along with the EPA and the DES to get that money and get that stuff done. So that imminent risk to human health is really a big driver for that funding. I wouldn't say it allows for additional funding, but it definitely gets you a priority. So next slide. All right,
Stay there 1 second.
Oh, no problem.
Be better. One more time, apologies.
That's the next presentation. Okay, that's me. Okay, if the PFAS cleanup is moved from interim status to the next level, how does it affect cleanup efforts, schedule, and budget? And so basically, under circular after the ROD, the cleanup effort will shift to implementation of the selected remedies until that goal is met and the site is closed out. You can kind of see the basics of CERCLA, the stages on the bottom as a graphic. And I believe you have this up too later, don't you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
so-
nicely.
Okay. So that was, I wanted to answer those questions here at the public forum, so they were on record. With that, if there's any questions on these answers to questions, I'll pass it along to the next presenter. Keep things moving. Andrew?
Question. Yeah, so regarding interim remedies, I think these questions came out of an announcement from DOD or, you know, that they were, going to be implementing interim remedies at several sites, and Pease was listed in that. And so I think that created some confusion because we thought maybe there were some new interim remedies at Pease, but I just want to clarify, the remedies that they were mentioning in that announcement back in February was referring to Ames and Site 8, correct?
Correct, things that had already been, the reference that they had put in that document was those that were already had been implemented and those that were planned. And so they didn't differentiate, so there was a point of confusion in the memo.
Okay, but to be clear, there's no additional interim remedies that are planned for Pease at this time.
Not currently, because there are no current imminent, threats to human health in the environment right now. Those have been addressed through the two systems and other private well minimum actions.
Go ahead, Michael.
I just want to ask you, you made it a strong point that the Air Force alone is going to select this remedy. Doesn't the remedy have to be approved by any regulatory body?
Yes.
Okay, good.
They're all.
I feel better.
Michael,
but yeah, I mean,
raising his hands.
Those are the rules as written, but of course, they're.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a way to adjudicate if there's a difference of opinion on a remedy, then so that they can sort of resolve issues, and unfortunately, they can go up through our respective, very highest levels of our respective agencies to resolve the dispute on remedy selection. But generally speaking, I mean, we've always sort of worked and collaboratively worked to get to a remedy selection that we've all agreed to and state is supported. So, and that's our hope going forward.
Can I just ask, what's the community input or involvement in the process of the remedy?
Yeah, so as I think the slides that are laid out, so yes, there is one of the criteria is sort of community acceptance. So yeah, and that's what these forums are for, really. I mean, is to try to sort of keep everybody up to speed and updated. So when we get to that critical point, you sort of know why the Air Force is selecting the remedy they're selecting. And, you know, hopefully all the sort of feedback that we're getting as part of this, through this forum will inform us. And again, that's we're trying to avoid a situation where we're presenting proposed remedial action for a site and not have nobody knowing what the hell we're talking about, why we're doing it. So hopefully, I mean, that's the ideal is when we have this forum and these discussions, we'll hopefully we know where they're going. We think we know what they're going to select, and we're supportive of that. So, you know, that's sort of why we're here today. You know, and that's why I think it's critical to maintain this sort of dialogue. So we're letting you know what we're up to, and we'll get to that point. You know, the 26th is, I think, when we have what's the draft RA? Draft RA 40.
It has to be finalized in 20.
It has to be finalized.
Right, so get that off.
Right.
So not long.
Not long.
And like, just to clarify, there's obviously this process is also going to be public comment period for any.
Right,
document,
and
of
that's
course.
exactly, so the circle process requires that solicitation of comments, and if you go back into the historical record, we've actually had and made some modifications to remedies based on that public input during that period of the process. So, in fact, in this room, I think Peggy would probably remember that, some of the changes we made to some of the remedies from input from, at the time, you had a tag advisor, the EPA provided a tag grant to the community. So we did, I can think of a couple remedies. I think a couple of remedies within the Zone 3 operable unit, we made some modifications based on input from the community. So.
Toby, before you go on, I think your computer's gonna shut down. I don't think you have it properly plugged in. It's really stressing me out here.
How's that possible?
I think it's.
You know, I never did this,
Table.
When your phone gets down to 2%, you.
Oh, you know what, I did that.
Oh, it's that.
My flashing light.
Alright, we got it. Okay. Thanks. We're on it. All right, we wanna, we'll continue, we'll make sure that's not gonna shut down. Do we want any more questions on Chris? Do we press forward?
Yeah, let's press for time.
Right.
Come back.
Go ahead. Deborah, you're up.
Next, Haley.
Yeah.
Next slide, please.
Okay.
So I know this is a long way to document, and I just want to point out that as we were just talking about, the RI report is, and will go final by end of 2026. So that's a result of the extension of the RI that is the field work that Lindsay talked about in the recorded presentation. So under the circle process, there's one RI report. So this is our informal technical informational report that we prepared given the RI extension last year. So the purpose of this document is to be a data deliverable ahead of the completion of the RI report that will make data available to stakeholders and the public. So it delivers the data from the fall of 2020. So we did a little bit of pre-RI sampling to help inform that work plan through June 2023. So it's everything except for the current ongoing field mobilization. This is primarily in the form of tables and figures. There are 68 figures and 12 tables in this document. But it also does include some supportive text that helps to guide the reader, providing context and outlining some of the data collection and some of the desktop work that's been performed. It also has, within that context, there's a high-level CSM update, a conceptual site model, based on the findings as of June 2023. And the text tables and figures are presented in the same framework that we've used to present here at the RAP. So some of the figures that are in the ITIR are also at the back of the room. There might be some slight changes to those were drafted in May 2023, but in essence, they're the same figures, it's the same data. So they're broken down in ways you're familiar with, potential and known source areas. We have our groundwater flow fields, the one to the north and the one to the south that you should be familiar, I hope. But they're also broken down by media, like soil, tissue, and groundwater, so that you can really navigate what you're interested in looking at. And I'll show you sort of how we've set this up so that you can navigate all of that wealth of tables and figures in a couple of slides. Next slide, please. So I know this is probably small on the board, but if you have the slide deck in front of you, this is just the table of contents of the ITIR. And the purpose of this is just to sort of give you an idea of what you can expect in it and the flow of the document and how it's set up. So sections 1 through 3.2 really set the stage for the data and the discussion of source areas and flow fields, which will come in section 5. Section 4 outlines our framework for the fate and transport modeling, but the results of that modeling will be in the RI report because we'll need to incorporate the data that we are collecting currently as part of this mobilization for that to be completed. And then section 6 outlines the types of samples collected for the risk assessment specifically and the approach for calculating some of the risk screening levels. And section 7 includes the data gaps identified that were subsequently and currently investigated as part of the current field mobilization. So you may notice I skipped section 3.3. So this is a section that is basically composed of 2 tables. If you could move to the next slide, Toby. So again, I know this is kind of small. So the one, these 2 tables kind of talk to each other and you'll be able to crosswalk information in the table on the left to information in the table on the right. So I'm going to show an example in a second, but we'll walk through it first. So this section is really the section that will guide the reader through the figures and tables. So that one on the left outlines the source areas or investigation areas, and the media types, by work plan mobilization. So as many of you know, we've had, there was one initial RI work plan, that was the commencement of the RI fieldwork in May of 2021, and we've worked off of a number of technical memorandum work plans since that time. So if you're particularly interested in work conducted under a specific work plan, you can find it that way. It'll also help provide some context with the timeline. The second table, so the one on the right, crosswalks the source area to the tables and figures where you can find the data associated with that. And this is also organized by media. So these two pictures are the very beginning of each of those tables. They're not complete. Obviously, there's a lot more soil data that's been collected under the initial RI, for instance. So these are pretty substantial tables themselves, but I think they're pretty well organized and good, helpful to navigate through this. So for example, and I have a couple of animations for you, Toby. So if you were interested in groundwater at landfill 5, then you could basically go find this area, or maybe you found it on a figure, figure 2, another click, which is referenced at the top of that table. So that's the figure that is hopefully somewhat familiar, that has source areas investigated to date, so you can kind of see where it is spatially on the peninsula and find the location. Then you can find the results specific to landfill 5. Click again on figures 26, 27, and then the data will be in table 2. One more click, maybe two. So that's how you can kind of crosswalk between those two tables, and they will work with some of those figures as well, figure 2, some of those earlier figures that will help sort of guide you through spatially that area. But this is sort of, I guess you'd sort of think of this as a table of contents to the tables and figures. Couple other things about this is that the data tables themselves are pretty large. So those are broken out by source area or flow field as well. So they are large, but they'll have headers that will break up the results in the same fashion, and should help you locate a specific sample result. One last note is, you may recall from previous RABs, we've talked about that a lot of the figures do show historical data, because it's really important for us to bear in mind as we move through the investigation. The tables in the ITIR include data that's been collected under the RI. So the figures will show some locations with comparisons to RSLs, but that numerical value won't be in the ITIR. Those will be provided in the RI report. So just to be clear that that those historical results will be available for the specific values. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a preview of what you can expect to see, and you can refer back to this once you have the document in front of you to say, where should I even start with 68 figures and 12 tables.
And now I think this is you, Deborah.
This is me, yes, I can't see that slide very well, so I'm gonna go. All right, good evening. This is gonna be, I think, pretty short. I'm Deborah McDonald. I'm with ECC, Environmental Chemical Corporation. And I'm a deputy program manager, and I oversee a lot of the work that ECC is working with the Air Force at Pease. We also have Grace Carmichael, she's a project manager with ECC, moving in the back, and Catherine Guido, who's an environmental scientist working on our projects here at Pease Air Force Base. So you may have seen us kind of lurking around at the other RAD meetings for the last year or two.
We've been attending just to get some recognition and some familiarity. We need to stay with them eventually when we might want to give a talk about some of the work that we're doing at Pease. And we actually began working out at Pease for the Air Force in 2020, and our contract goes through 2030. So you'll be seeing us around, and maybe we'll be able to present a few more presentations of the work that we're doing out here. The work that UCC is doing as opposed to what WSP is doing are the sites, and this is going to dovetail nicely with the CERCLA process and what we, have been talking about a little bit in the last few minutes. These are sites with decision documents or records of decision. They already have remedies in place. So the kinds of contamination that we're dealing with monitoring and with cleanup and remediation is in a couple of different categories. Some are petroleum-based, jet fuel releases or spills, gasoline and oils. And these are referred to as non-CERCLA sites because petroleum contamination is not covered under CERCLA, not considered a hazardous waste. That's usually monitored and taken care of under state programs for petroleum contamination. The other contamination that we deal with, or groups of contaminants that we deal with, can be chlorinated solvents. These are cleaners or degreasers that were commonly used around industry and around the Air Force Base. There's metal, polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs, mixed waste like in landfills, construction and demolition debris, or even household waste that was disposed of. And these are referred to as the CERCLA sites. They're covered by CERCLA. And just as a final point down here, just as a reminder, CERCLA is the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, also called Superfund. And this is the federal act that was enacted in order to track and clean up hazardous waste sites. So right now, what we're going to talk about a little bit is that among the work that we're doing is that ECC is preparing the 6th CERCLA 5-year review report, which covers the CERCLA sites. All right, so the CERCLA process, and Mike kind of talked about this a little bit, and so did Chris. So we start with a new site, and there's a preliminary assessment that's conducted, and then a site inspection, then the remedial investigation, which you are dealing with the PFAS. After the remedial investigation is a feasibility study, and then there's a record of decision. After that record of decision is when a remedial design is put into place. And there's remedial action construction. When that construction is completed, you have a remedy in place. And then once that remedy in place is completed, you have remedial action operations, response complete, and then long-term management and site closure. And there's a few notes on here. The sites don't always follow all of these steps. Sometimes you skip some steps depending upon the kind of contamination that you have and whether you're able to go out and just take care of everything all in one fell swoop, so to speak, with an excavation. But the key here when we talk about the CERCLA 5-year review and that whole process is the remedy in place. You can see we have the star there. And that's when the 5-year review process starts, is when there's a remedy in place. So what is a 5-year review? So we've got a lot of, that's what I wouldn't have been able to read up back there. So basically the 5-year review is a requirement in the regulations, and it requires that remedial actions which result in any hazardous substances, pollutants or contaminants remaining at the site be subject to a 5-year review. And then further, we go on with a further definition that the NCP provides further that remedial actions which result in any hazardous substances, pollutants, or contaminants remaining at a site above levels that allow for unlimited use in unrestricted exposure, or UUUE, be reviewed every 5 years to ensure protection of human health and the environment. So basically, if a remedial action is conducted, you have a remedy, you put that remedy in place, and you have remedial actions conducted. If there's still some contamination that's at that site that doesn't allow for this term UUUE, which is basically you can do anything at that site. There's no land use controls in effect. You can go and put up residential housing, you can have a daycare, a school, or anything like that. If you are not at contaminant levels that allow for that unlimited use, then you need to do a 5-year review. So these sites that do have some of this contaminant still in place, they have the remedies in place to protect human health and the environment. And as I mentioned previously, they'll have land use controls typically. And those land use controls are the controls that are put in place so that you don't have residential housing and you don't have daycares or schools that are built. Maybe you can't use the groundwater at that site. You can't put in a drinking water well. Those are land use controls, and those are put into place to protect human health and the environment while the remedy is still ongoing and then the site is still being managed. So the Air Force evaluates the implementation and the performance of the remedy at each site. And this is to ensure that the remedy is still performing as it's intended and as it's specified in the decision document or the ROD, the record of decision, and it still remains protective after 5 years, after 10 years. These are in 5-year increments. So every 5 years, the review is completed. The 5-year review does include an interview process where members of the public familiar with the cleanup program are interviewed regarding their knowledge of the cleanup process. And then just kind of as an aside, the reports and the work plans and the information that pertain to these sites that are part of this CERCLA 5-year review, you can find all of these documents on site at the administrative record. With the Air Force administrative record, they're at the Site 8 physical repository that I think some of you have probably visited, where we just were. The other building behind, we've got all of the printed documents back when we used to print all of our documents, and we still do. And that's a physical repository of all these documents from like the last 30 years or so, because we are in the 6th 5-year review. So this is data that's been going back from 30 years ago. And so, or the New Hampshire OneStop is another online repository for a lot of these documents and information. So there's a number of different places that you can go to both physically and virtually in order to find some of the reports that document all of this work that's been done at these sites for the last 3 years. So in the 5-year review, in order to assess whether the remedy is still protective and still operating as it should be, there are 3 primary questions that are literally asked within the document and then they are answered. The first is question A: is the remedy functioning as intended by the decision document? Question B: are the exposure assumptions, toxicity data, cleanup levels, the remedial action objectives, use of the time still valid? For example, if you had a metal, you had, one of the arsenic was one of your metals, and the cleanup level changed for arsenic, that would be a consideration that you'd have to look at and discuss within the 5-year review. Did the cleanup level go up? Did it go down? How does that affect the protectiveness of your remedy? And then the final question: has any other information come to light that could call into question the protectiveness of the remedy? Are there potentially new receptors because of changes in land use that are around the site or anything like that? So these are the 3 main questions that are asked and answered in the 5-year review for each of the sites. And you're not going to be able to read this, but basically it's just to show that across former Pease Air Force Base, there are 20 sites that are included in the 5-year review. And these are just the parcels, the different colors that you see here, but they're all across, you can see they're all across the former base. So I did mention that there is an interview process where input is gathered from folks who are familiar with the sites and the remedies. And there are some general questions and some specific questions. So we have them listed here, and I don't know if I'll go through and read them word for word, but the general questions are, are you familiar with the cleanup program and what's been going on at the site? Do you know about the environmental use restrictions, the land use controls that we mentioned earlier? And do you have any concerns with the implementation of those land use controls? And then some more specific questions kind of dig into those land use controls a little bit. Are you aware of any use or extraction of groundwater at the site other than what's necessary for the investigation or remedial activities? Any injection of water into the groundwater or the surface water? Any changes to the areas, that have use restrictions, as we mentioned, for residential purposes, for example, childcare centers, playgrounds. Has any digging or excavation been conducted without the approval of the regulatory agencies in the Air Force? And has there been any change in the use of buildings? We have buildings on the sites that are industrial use. Are they being used for residential use at this point? So those are basically the questions that are asked during that interview process that we mentioned. And that is it. Any questions?
Deborah? Great, yeah, let's go to Andrea. We'll take, I think, yes, let's do some questions.
I have a few questions. I feel like we covered a few topics and we didn't pause to ask questions, but I guess to ask the question about the 5-year review, if community members were interested in being interviewed, how would they go about signaling that to you? Or to the Air Force, or how do we sign up to be interviewed if we'd like to be part of this process?
We typically will contact the folks who've been involved with and are familiar with the cleanup process. So for example, Mike Daly and Peter Sandin were both interviewed as community members for the 5-year review.
Okay, so if community members that live in the community, like us on the RAB, would like to be interviewed, how do we be part of that process?
So I guess you could contact the Air Force.
Okay, so just let the Air Force know if there's local community members who'd like to be interviewed.
Okay, I think we'd go back.
There's an interest in that, for sure.
Sure, I mean, could you say you were aware of the non-PFAS related sites on the base?
I mean.
Again, lamps that live through. We could bring Lulu Pickering in here and she'll talk to you for 3 days about it. I mean, there's all kinds of community members.
Well, sure, I mean,
that are knowledge
review of
the past.
Well, no, yeah, we're not talking about, we're talking about, are these things still effective now?
She's on the PDA. She's a member of the PDA. Wouldn't she know how it's working out? Wouldn't she be a good person to talk to?
Would you like to be interviewed? Or someone?
So I think the question was how does a member of the community who wants to be interviewed, right? Let that be known. I think the answer is speak to the Air Force, right?
You have ample representation in Peter here as well. So I think he represents you as the community and he has been interviewed and has answered all those questions.
So usually what they do is actually, usually it's people that sort of, are sort of like property owners or the folks on the site. So that's usually one of the sort of definite list, people on the list. But I think people in the community that are familiar with the base or about the base, I think those have always been extended, those interviews, awkward interviews with folks too. So I think, PDA, any of the sort of the tenants on the base would be prudent. And then again, we have these other folks that feel you want to sort of provide some insight on. Yeah, I think that's fine. I extend the offer at least.
Yeah, I think it's just helpful for us to know if someone's interested in being interviewed part of this process, how do we do it? So we would contact Chris. Okay. Cool. The ITIR, thank you very much for the overview on how to interpret, read it and understand what's in the report, but when will we receive it? That's the big question.
We had a really good meeting today, so thank you, Mr. Sandin, for your very, very lengthy comment that we received about a week ago. We went through them today with him, the ones that we were confused about, so we now know our path forward and we're gonna try to get this out really, really quickly at this point. But we got through it, was about 2 hours today, to where we'll be able to turn that sucker out. I don't have a timeline. I don't think there's a great deal of changes we have to make, maybe another bigger, couple weeks maybe. Is that so?
Yeah, so I'll walk the two. I think we had a dialogue. I think we talked about some of the verbally, some of the things we'd like to see, and then I'll probably just follow up with the Air Force as well. But I think hopefully soon, I think we all agree sooner better.
Absolutely, and recognizing that you want to have your task contractor look at it and possibly get together and have a workshop fairly soon. We are taking that under consideration to get this done as quickly as possible so that we can get that on the books.
Okay.
Yep.
And in terms of data sharing, because this kind of goes in part, has the data sharing issues completely resolved? I know with the ITIR in particular, the maps and the figures were redacted.
Yeah, that's all taken care of.
So that's all a non-issue?
Currently, the only thing that's gonna still be redacted are the private properties until we have all of that sorted with all of them.
Okay, but everything else, so if we were to log on to One Stop today, we would see figures that are unredacted now?
I see no, no. Any historical document is probably not gonna get fixed anytime soon.
I agree, yeah.
The amount of work that would take is astronomical.
Okay,
Right?
so everything that was redacted in the past, we're not gonna expect that that will now all of a sudden be unredacted?
No, it's
If that's gonna remain redacted and then moving forward, you will not redact that information?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, I'll let some other people ask some questions.
Just to clarify that, with the exception of the private lots, right?
Correct.
Those are not shown.
Those are not what?
Those are not shown on the.
Right.
In the IPI.
Right.
Okay, so Michael, I want to get to your question. I just want to know, we're almost at public comment. We still haven't heard from the city of Portsmouth. I'm not sure, Mike, if you have more you want to share. So Michael, I'm going to give you the floor, but I just want to know at the time, if you could keep the answers brief, so we have a chance to do those. Please go ahead, the floor is yours.
I am Mike and Michael.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's always been like that since I came. So back to the 5-year review.
Right.
Site 39. Is that within the scope of the 5-year review?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Because that's pretty important economically to the state, given the size of that. It's the biggest hangar on the base and hasn't been able to be used since.
Gonna be taken care of, Michael.
Yeah, good. Secondly, regarding the private well data, would I be right if I understood that despite the fact you have 17, you probably have more coming in, hopefully when you get back?
Hopefully, yeah.
Because, I mean, the selectmen put a lot of effort into this. We supported you and, you know, came up with a letter that was used for those private well owners. Is it possible that the ITR, since it's being delayed anyway, could include the data of those people that gave the consent? Because you're gonna issue another document.
All of the data is in there right now, but all of the private well information is redacted as far as location, right?
Yeah.
So all of that, but the data itself isn't. If that's.
Yeah, I know, but where it is on the peninsulas.
Well, you will have, there are several figures that have kind of the model polygons.
Okay, well, we'll put it over, but I'm just saying, you're not gonna correct any historic document. So you're issuing this ITR without that information.
Mm-hmm.
And it's gonna end up causing people to ask more questions and questions and questions.
Mhm.
And so at a minimum, you should think about committing in that particular instance to update the document once this process that you've engaged in to seek the consensus obtained.
Okay.
Think about it.
Yep, noted. Well, for now, I'll get back with you.
Yeah, that's fine. And well, that's fine. We'll let it go. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, so I'm wondering, like, how long do you need, we plan to share for as part of your pre-presentation here?
I don't, he's not, there was something. Al, did you want to go?
Okay, so let's move to Al. Al, you have a quick update from the city, and then we'll go open to public comment, and I think we'll just start that a couple of minutes late, but we'll get there.
Yeah, and Andrew still needs to speak as well.
Yeah,
So we'll,
yeah, I'm excited.
do we have anybody that's been asking questions? No? So
Nothing online?
let's assume we're not gonna have anyone that we had that, some for public comment. We
Okay, let's go to Al for the first.
So I just want to give an update briefly on the Pease drinking water treatment facility. And for those new RAD members, I don't know how much you're familiar with the water system at Pease, but there are 3 groundwater wells at Pease that all pump into the Grafton Drive drinking water treatment facility where we treat the PFAS. Started up in April of 2021, so it's been in operation for 3 years now, almost exactly. So far, we've treated 635 million gallons through that facility. We average about 15 million gallons a month, so it's treating a lot of water going through there. Past demand 40 gallons, 540,000 gallons per day. Summertime, that gets upward around 800 to 1 million gallons a day. 800,000 to 1 million gallons a day. So performance has been great as designed. PFAS removal, there's been no regulated PFAS compounds detected in the treated water. There are the two short chain compounds that we talked about, the PFBA and PFBEA. That are still detected in the treated water. The latest rounds were 11 parts per trillion and 6 parts per trillion, so very low levels of those. One interesting fact that we've seen in our latest round from the Haven well, so the Haven well, 10 years ago, 10 years ago, it's been 10 years since the detection of PFAS at the Haven well, about May, was when they were first detected. And those early detections were around 2,500 parts per trillion and 1,400 or 1,600 parts per trillion in that range. Our latest round from the Haven well had 197 parts per trillion. So the reduction in that is very good. Very happy to see that. Part of that's probably attributed to the AIM system doing what it's supposed to be doing. Precipitation recharge might be part of that as well. We're seeing much lower levels of PFAS as well as PFHXS and PFOA as well. So that's good news for our treatment side of things. Activities that have been going on. So last year at this time, we changed out one of the granule activated carbon filters and 6 of the resin vessels, 6 of the 12 vessels. We changed out a second of the carbon vessels in February this year, and we are right in the process right now of replacing the other 6 of 12 resin vessels this week. So those are all getting upgraded with the CalRes media. It's a macroporous media versus the old style resin, which was gel-based media. This new media that we're using seems to be performing very well. Pressures are maintaining better than the first media that we have. So, and that's about it. It was an expensive process. So each time we changed out these medias, last round was $591,000 to change out the GAC and all the resins. So, big process. We're in the middle of it now. So. Still working as designed, and well, glad to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Alan. Any questions for City of Portsmouth for Al? Yeah, Rosalie, please go ahead.
I guess, so where is the media going when you do the change out?
The media is being shipped to a hazardous waste landfill in Idaho, Class C landfill. We're following the Air Force's lead where they send all of their media, to be disposed of as hazardous waste.
At one point, someone mentioned Michigan.
There's a landfill in Michigan as well.
Okay.
And Alabama, there's 3 or 4 of them around the country.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a current ban on incinerating PFAS impacted waste right now, so that's the alternative now. So there's been no update on incineration of waste lifting or any of our rules coming out of that nature, but we're waiting. They keep saying they're coming and they keep not coming.
Any other questions for Al? Please go ahead.
I think it might be one for Chris. I know you can't incinerate now, but have you looked at other destruction technologies like Halt or plasma, squirrel?
Right now we haven't, because the destruction thing is kind of the reason why incineration is has been kind of banned for the time being. I think that they were doing a lot of look into environmental justice issues. And so these other types of things haven't been evaluated for that yet as well. Again, we're waiting at we follow the DOD and Air Force guidance right now, and the current guidance is it's going to the Class C landfill. Again, it's not being disposed as hazardous waste as it's not hazardous waste, but it's going to that class of landfill because those are the most highly protected. You know, the liners and the leachate systems and all that good stuff. So it's just the current way to dispose of the waste with the least potential impact of the environment in the future, kind of a thing, right? So that's where it's at now. That's where we stand. But in the future, who knows what kind of, again, we're waiting on that policy, what other type of destruction methodologies would be allowed. Again, that's, fingers crossed. There's a line full spaces, you know, it's not forever, it runs away, it runs out, and it's becoming a bigger deal nationwide, and who knows what's gonna happen, so we're looking for that guidance in the winter.
All right, well, Andrew, I think why don't we, unless there are further questions on this, why don't we turn it to you for the update on RAB community concerns?
Yep. Do you have the
I
slides?
do
for
have
me?
your slides, I will
Okay.
share those. Yeah, there you go. And
Yeah.
we'll get to public comment in just a few minutes.
Okay, I'll move quickly. I know we're strapped for time. So these are just the topics I plan to briefly discuss, and I just made slides for them. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. Just to orient everybody in the room, especially our new members, the RAB community sent a letter to the Air Force, New Hampshire DES, US EPA on October 16th, asking several questions and raising some points after reviewing historical documents at PEAS under the guidance of our technical assistance advisor, SKIO. We received a response on February 16th. And then we also had sent an email after our last RAB meeting when we learned about chicken eggs that were tested in Newington and screening levels weren't shared with the community members. We asked the Air Force to go back and recontact those egg owners and share the screening levels. And so I know all those letters were circulated to the general RAB, and our community RAB members met, and we just have some general reactions. And I wanted to share those reactions tonight, and then, we'll decide if we want to follow up in writing formally or, but I want to say thank you for your instructions on how to process the administrative record or access the administrative record in New Hampshire DES One Stop. We asked for a webinar, which you did not acknowledge in the email or the letter back, excuse me. SKIO has agreed to do this for our community and record it for future reference. So I think that we will be able to get that need met for us through SKIO. I also want to say that, despite 4 months to get a response, the letter lacks specific timelines and was not committal in many places, despite us asking for specific information and citations. Overall, this was disappointing to the community members. We also want to recognize that we're glad to know that the most current screening levels will be implemented in the work ahead. And the community does remain concerned about data gaps regarding shellfish and finfish. We appreciate the commitment to use the most current toxicity values, but it's not clear how they will be implemented. Also, very specific questions were asked about species and endangered species, and that was not addressed in the response. Our SKIO team does agree with the RAB community that there are data gaps in this area, and we would specifically like some dedicated time at our ITIR technical session that we are going to have in the future, really focused on this area with all of us involved, DES, EPA, Air Force, SKIO, community members. This is something I'd really like us to be able to take a deeper dive on when we're all together. We also have concerns about the use of PRGs at this point in the process. SKIO has explained to us that risk needs to be assessed before PRGs can be used. I know we should have Carmen on the line from SKIO who could certainly talk about that a little bit more in depth. I think in the interest of time, we won't get into that right now, but I do want to point out that that is a concern that SKIO has raised, and they can absolutely articulate that better than me. I also want to say that the response regarding the egg screening levels at the Air Force will not recontact the chicken egg owners. That was disappointing to the community. However, especially because there were multiple stakeholders who asked the Air Force to do that, not only the community, our congressional offices, the Board of Selectmen asked that. But we were able to get New Hampshire DES here to provide more contextual information to the community. And we know that Martha Roy from the town of Newington has letters from Maine that have more information. And the state toxicologist, Dr. John Patali, has agreed to meet with anybody in Newington who has questions. So we do feel like that contextual information can be met, but we just want to recognize that we were disappointed that that request wasn't granted. And then lastly, I just want to say in reaction to these letters and just overall community engagement, in general, the RAB community feels that responses to the community in the last 2 to 3 years have been very boilerplate due to PEAS being cutting edge and ahead of hundreds of other sites that DoD is dealing with. We really want to see the Air Force refocus on our specific site. And we want more timeliness in our responses and more transparency. It's just something and Chris, that's not directed towards you specifically. We recognize that there's multiple layers of bureaucracy above you that is having to review all the information, having to review the responses, but, you know, to adequately engage with the community, and we make requests and we ask questions, it shouldn't take 4 months to get like an answer that didn't really answer what we asked and not get the level of detail that we asked for. And so I just want to recognize, as I know that many eyes are on this RAB, that the community engagement has, we've seen some disappointing sides to that, and we hope that we can get back to being, having more timely responses and have it being more specific to our community and not more general because of the concern of how it will apply to many other things. So that is our overall reaction to the letters. We met as a RAB community members to discuss that. If anybody else wants to add anything that I didn't, I'm happy to move on, or if anybody, if Chris or Peter or Mike, you have any reactions to our reactions, we're happy to take them.
No, your reactions are what I was expecting. I appreciate your recognition of the bureaucracy. It is the government. It's not me. And it's kind of showing itself elsewhere. I could take case in point to getting the videos posted. I know that's way more longer than it should have been. And another layer of security is added to things. I don't know what's driving that. I don't. But it's sometimes, it is the government, so be patient and, do note it. Sometimes I'm frustrated with the speed of things as well. And, I will pass this along to my leadership and those folks in the know that, that was a problem. I admit 4 months is way too long for that. And hopefully we learned from the issues. And now we talked about, you and I, Andrea, on the side about, hey, we've learned our lessons with that the human health risk assessment plan and how those questions went. And what can we do in the future to prevent that and get a little more actively involved? That's, the idea of maybe doing our next gig will be a workshop. I'll talk about the ITR a little more in depth so you all understand it and get that and keep things moving that way. So again, you bear with me. I'm trying with that to y'all. I understand your needs and I empathize with your positions for sure. And my hands are tied sometimes, but yeah, call me when things are bothering you and we'll sort through it.
Okay. And do we have a commitment that when we do have a technical session on the ITIR, we can focus sometimes specifically on shellfish and finfish? Because I think that's an area of concern.
It's going to be a data gap discussion, I suppose. And, it's we'll hear your concerns.
Thank you.
I'd just like to
sorry.
Sure. And I think certainly there's some disappointment there on the state's part. I think that the place that we're at, and I really appreciate the efforts from the town of Millington, from the RAB community members to liaise to the private landowners, because of the data sharing restrictions imposed at the highest level with DOD. It's just important that anyone who's private data, whether it's drinking water, eggs, produce, whatever it could be, if they've got a question, to know that we're not getting copied on, we don't know who they are, but we need to know that they know how to reach out to us if they have questions about, health related concerns or what their data means. So if they come back to the Air Force, I hope the Air Force is providing that guidance to them. And if the community has their finger on the pulse and knows that there are people out there that have concerns about egg consumption or the water they're drinking, there are resources here at the state, and we want to be able to provide them the answers they need.
If I can follow on that, with the data sharing issues being resolved, what does that mean for chicken egg owners? Does that mean Peter will now have access to that information or who those owners were?
He'll know the GPS coordinates of it, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So that's all been, the eggs are the only thing that's protected as private drinking water well information, right? So all that stuff is, you'll see it in the ITIR as well. It's all open.
Okay.
So, yeah, and just to let you all know, I always put my contact information on any data sampling letter that goes out. In my tenure, I've received 2 phone calls about it. People I don't know if they're concerned about calling it or they accept it as it is, but I'm always available to those property owners and even the people in the private lands where, when they get their data transmitted, they're always encouraged to contact me with any issues, but it's a rare occasion when they do. Yeah. And so I know, Peter, you're concerned that they're not reaching out. They don't reach out to me either. So
they do reach out to me. And I encourage them to share.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Thanks. I know this information was emailed out to the RAB, but I just want to recognize that DES did host 2 meetings here in Newington back in February. One was on PFAS research in Great Bay, and the other one was PFAS research in our homes and yards. So the YouTube links were shared. Thank you very much to the town of Newington for hosting these meetings. Thank you very much to Dr. John Fatale from DES for leading those up. He also brought speakers from UNH, Dartmouth, etc. I thought these meetings were very valuable, and I just wanted to make everyone aware of those and have this information. So go ahead. And they were recorded. The YouTube links are on there. Yep. As we talked about, the RAB community members have been working with our technical assistance advisors through SKIO, which is an EPA-funded program. We started working with them last year. Everything that we do with them has to be approved by the EPA. So far, they've done some work for us in the past, and upcoming, we have approval for them to review the ITIR, participate in a technical session, have them provide comments to the community, and they can also host a community meeting to kind of simplify what is showing in that document. And in blue, I talk about having specific time to talk about shellfish and finfish, but last week I did send an email to the EPA, Mike Daly, asking for additional action items to be approved. And I just wanted to make everybody aware of what those action items are. We don't have to go through all of them, but one is the webinar on how to access the administrative record in one stop. We want SKIO to review the 5-year review document once it's published to help us understand what that means. And also have SKIO work on a community involvement plan, which is something I guess they're very familiar with doing with the EPA. And then we also want them to take a look at the latest PFAS filtration and remediation technology available being used to treat PFAS in comparison to what's being used at Site A and Ames, and present their findings to us. So I haven't heard back from the EPA if those items will be approved, but I just want to let everyone know what's coming down the pipe with SKIO and what we're looking for in the future for approved action items. We can go to the next slide. This was actually addressed tonight, so thank you very much. The interim remedy email, we did ask these 5 questions, and I just provided more context about the emails and the announcement, so we don't really need to go over this. Thank you for providing your responses. Next. Access agreement. So one question, thank you for sending those out. I went through some of the communications that we had. As Mike mentioned, we drafted a letter for the Air Force to send to the private owners, well owners. Newington Board of Selectmen also wrote a letter encouraging people to sign. I guess the one question that hasn't been clear to me is, did you send our letters with your access agreements?
I did not. I was not allowed to.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we do know that the town of Newington did send our letter plus the Board of Selectmen letter to all of the private well owners that they have on file. So at least we know it got that way. Okay, that's good to know. I know in our last meeting, we made that offer and you were excited about us writing a letter. So is there a reason why it wasn't allowed?
Basically policy, just policy, and we'll handle this on our own unless necessary, and that's kind of how it went.
Okay.
And it's still been successful, but again, thank you for your efforts, sir. I think it's working out great. I hope that the people that haven't responded yet are just being lazy and haven't done it yet, as opposed to still debating whether or not the data share, but we'll see as they keep rolling in.
Okay, and so if you don't hear back from them, do you have a follow-up policy to recontact them, like after so much time?
Yeah, we're gonna have to. I don't think we ever have that in writing, but it's, we're paying attention, so.
Okay.
We're not just gonna let that die.
So when you do that, could you include our letter, or and that's a policy that comes about you? Okay. All right, next slide, please.
If I could, when you send your second letter, if you could let us know who you're sending that to, okay, then we can send another letter or the first letter we send. Probably we can.
I will ask about that again. Sharing information is kind of what we're not allowed to do.
Or maybe we'll just send another letter out to all the well owners again.
Okay.
If that keeps you out of trouble, that's fine.
Thank you. Next slide. I just want to recognize a topic that the RAB would like to request for a future meeting is to review the AFFF releases since 2014 and determine if there's an appropriate monitoring plan in place. I know Peter and I spoke over the phone a couple weeks ago, But I think this is something that initially we were gonna ask Theo to do, and I think it'd be helpful if we could plan for a future RAB meeting to talk about
What do
that.
you mean AFFF releases? The bases would shut down for so many years. So
Well, the Air National Guard is here.
Okay. Well, we could maybe ask them if they want to present something like that in the future. Is Representative Mr. Jordan's here? No. There you go. You're on
And-
no, buddy.
Yeah, and it's my
I don't know anything
understanding
about them.
it has to be reported. If there are releases, it has to be reported and, you know, so that was a question that came up from the RAB community members. Has there been additional releases? And there's also a fire department on Pease that the city of Portsmouth runs. So, you know, I think it's a relevant question for sure. Even though the base is closed, there's still absolutely activity. It's an active airport. So yeah, I just want to put that out there that was a request for a future RAB topic. And then based on what we learn on that, we can decide if that's something we want SKIA to look more into. Next slide, please. And then just my last update real quick. A year ago, I let everyone know I participated in a program at the University of Florida. They were looking for communities with PFAS contamination. They wanted to test foam. I know, Rose, you brought that up tonight. In some communities, they have found that foam does have really high concentrations of PFAS, particularly in Michigan. They have a do not touch advisory, I believe, on the foam. And so this is something I have raised here before. And I was able to send samples to Florida, and I have continually checked in with them about the results. And this was the latest result I got at the end of March, so I just wanted to share. And the pictures are of my son, who went out and helped me collect the samples a year ago, one on Pease and one in Newington. And right now the samples have been analyzed. They haven't released the data yet as they're processing it for a manuscript, and it's undergoing peer review. So unfortunately, until it is a peer-reviewed paper, they're not going to release individual data, which I have run into this before in other projects I participated in. So I just wanted to give everyone an update. I don't have any other timeline other than that, but just wanted you to know that I'm still waiting the results, and I'll share it with you as soon as I get it from the University of Florida. That is all I believe I have, and I don't know, Peggy, do you have a question for me?
Yes, thank you very much. I wish to commend you on what you have brought up on any of the points, and the points to the Air Force on the shellfish. We have a lot of oyster farmers on Little Bay, and I'm being very, very concerned what goes into Little Bay. I live on the bay, I know that. And then the other thing I want to, when you collected the foam, was that at McIntyre down on?
Yeah.
On the other side of town?
McIntyre Road.
Yeah, off McIntyre Road,
Yeah.
and it was down on Newington Road. There is we call it the McIntyre Brook that the United States Air Force, that's where she collected the foam.
I don't think that's where it was. It was on McIntyre Road, but it wasn't McIntyre Brook.
Yeah, where it was, it said there was like fish and game, and it said it was open to the public. There were signs there. It was like a waterway.
I remember, I think it's the next crossing south of McIntyre.
Kennard, yeah.
Kennard.
Do we have anybody public comment?
Yeah, so I think,
Okay.
yeah, so I think that's where we are beyond the time. Is there anyone from the public who's interested in making a comment? Okay, so seeing no one, we have made it through the agenda. It is past 8 o'clock. And so I think we've had a chance for Q&A, unless there's any other pressing matters that a RAB member would like to raise. Okay, yeah, Michael, go ahead.
I think somebody has to acknowledge the work that the Air Force has done at Site 8 recently. And we started the meeting with that, but that's not reported really in the record. I think it's something we've been perhaps pestering about, but it's a interim remediation facility that has far lag behind the terrific results from the AIM system at the other end of the base. And it's just very pleasing to see that the Air Force has turned its attention to this and is doing so in a very meaningful way. It's still a pilot study, so no one should jump up and down yet, but, it needs to be acknowledged, and I appreciate the chance to say that, because I've been one of the biggest critics of the system.
Yeah, I saw Val was on the line earlier, so again, Val has been a big part of that in the past, he's done a lot to help us move forward with our contract. So y'all who have been around for a while know Val, he's my boss, and without him, we wouldn't be where we are right now. So again, thank you to Val, I don't know if you can speak here, but things are moving along great, and appreciate all your input.
Thanks so much for that, Michael.
Thank you.
Any other pressing matters before?
Just quickly, welcome the new members, and I'm hoping that you've gotten some guidance as to where to start to try to wrap your heads around everything that's been done here. I don't know if you've been told to read the RI work plan or the expanded site inspection report. There's a couple of key documents that are out there that if you're not aware of them, I think that's a great place for any RI member, if they haven't read them, to really see the summary of the work that's been done and hopefully try to get up to speed with the things that we're talking about here. And for Chris or I.
Well, yeah, and the CEO's been so involved in it as well, they maybe even have a summary for you by now.
Yeah, you posted all the past presentations, right, from the.
Right, they're all on
So
the-
those are actually very good. You really want a 30,000-foot view of, I think, the progress that's been made since, since the RAB has been reconstituted. And again, a lot of the folks that have been PFAS, not so much on stuff that PCC has been working on, but definitely more so the PFAS sort of discovery and then sort of investigations and other actions have been taken to sort of address the drinking water issues.
Were you gentlemen stationed at Eden?
I was
You were.
from 82 till I retired.
We need to talk.
Oh, Bob. There is none.
Okay. All right, well, I think let's call it an evening. Just in terms of next steps, we'll be drafting a meeting summary, so stay tuned for that. Slides will be posted, and we'll be in touch about the next meeting date. There are also a number of things we expect to happen between this meeting and the next. So the ITER should be released soon, we're hoping, and Steel will review that, and there's a plan to have a session around that, and here's a request about shellfish and finfish data gaps being part of that. Chris, we've heard a request to you to kind of check in, if you can share who you're might be recontacting about the data, right, and if you can convey that information. And we also heard this request around future topic for reviewing AFFF releases, and so we'll talk about that as a planning team. I think those are all the kind of next steps that I heard in the meeting. Want to thank everyone. Again, it's a pleasure to be part of this. Really interesting presentations and discussion today. We'll be in touch about the next meeting. Thank you so much. Apologies for going a bit late. Great night. Meeting is adjourned.